I will introduce myself and our speaker today. So I'm Matt Greco, the events manager here at PSS Life University. And every month we have Dina D'Alessandra, our registered dietitian, who is going to talk about a nutrition topic. And as you can see, and as you signed up for, today she's going to talk about nutrition facts. Please put any questions or comments into the chat. Sometimes people actually ask you in voice, and I think that's okay too when you get done. I think that's about all the stuff I have, so I'll just hand it right over to Dina.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be back again. I can't believe we're already in September. It's pumpkin spice season. And our topic today, we're going to focus on nutrition facts or food labels. And I'll go a little bit more into detail as we get into our presentation. As Matthew said, you can totally use the chat for Q&A or if you have comments, and I actually might even ask you some things as we're going along, but these last about 40-ish minutes or so, and then we usually have like a good chunk of time for proper Q&A at the end if you want to open up your mics or ask anything that's related to the webinar or not related to the webinar. I'll do my best to answer as much as I can. So some of the takeaways, hopefully by the end of today's conversation, where you could just be a more savvy consumer, but also if you are dealing with any kind of condition or know somebody who is and you're going shopping for them, you can be a little bit more conscientious of what you're looking for when it comes to label reading in the supermarket. And I'll share with you also some updates to some food label things as well. Housekeeping stuff, as you probably heard, the session is being recorded. I mentioned about the chat and the Q&A. This is just general information and guidance for you. I'm a dietitian, but I'm not your dietitian. So please make sure that you are checking with your own medical professionals, healthcare providers, if there's anything that you need to do or change in your diet or your habits. So if we've never met before, hello, my name is Dina D'Alessandro. I am a registered dietitian, as Matthew said. I'm actually coming to you live from my office on campus. I work a few days a week, a couple of days a week during each semester in two roles. I'm an adjunct lecturer in the Department of the Dietetics, Food and Nutrition, where I teach undergraduate and graduate nutrition sciences to anybody who eventually might become a dietitian as well at some point. And then I'm also the campus dietitian here at the Student Health Center. So today is actually my first day back in the fall semester. And I was just telling Matthew, my schedule will usually be packed. Today I had a few people on it so far and they all came. So I'm excited that they showed up and I was able to work with them. And then you can
Lehman
see
College. You didn't
Lehman
mention
College, Lehman College, sorry, Lehman College in the Bronx in New York City. Yes, Lehman College. This is actually where I went as my second degree undergrad, my Master of Science, my dietetic intern. And then, right, I gave them a lot of tuition, so they gave me a couple of jobs, which I appreciate. So thank you, everybody, for being here. You can see all of the other kind of credentials and experiences that I have under my belt there. I want to start just by saying, the discussion around labels appears on things that are packaged. And we think of packaged goods. Sometimes we don't think of the best quality of things. But quite honestly, when you look at the definition of a processed food, that might be a term you've heard of before, it's really anything that undergoes, a food item that undergoes any kind of processing that takes it away from its natural form. So on the left-hand side are things that you're probably more used to seeing in the quote unquote processed category, but the right-hand side is processed too. Who's picking the spinach leaves and sticking them in a plastic container? Who's grinding up the beef and putting that in a package? And again, right, who's doing the dairy items? The milk is coming out of a cow or a plant-based type of milk and is being processed in that shape or form too. So some things to keep in mind here, things that do not require or don't have to have a label are things like single item ingredients like an orange or a head of lettuce, anything in small packages like herbs and spices. And then outside of kind of the grocery store market area, restaurants and small businesses, so like mom and pop shops or restaurants, obviously, as well, that are giving you prepared foods to take or eat on site. And then sometimes too, if you ever see like fundraisers or events, they're not required to have nutrition labels on them either. And some alcoholic beverages don't have labels on them too. So just to keep in mind that if you're shopping around and making choices, you know what you're doing. Okay. Anatomy of a label. My friends, your science nerd here went through a 200-page document to get updated information on what is required when food manufacturers create foods and put them into packages. I'm not going to go through everything you see on screen here. There's a lot of criteria. In fact, I didn't even cover it on this slide. There's even so far as like what type of font, what size of font, and a lot of different indicators too. Like you can see there has to be ingredients that are declared, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a sec. If there's artwork, it can't disguise or look different than what the actual true food is. And of course, if there's an expiration date or a way that people have to store something in the sense of being food for food safety purposes, that also has to be indicated on the package as well. So every handful of years, the USDA, which is the Department of Agriculture, and the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, they go through and they look at research and they do updates and things. And again, if you're a science nerd like me, I'm on a lot of these governmental newsletters and email lists. I got to sit in on the committees and the workshops watching the new version take place. So this what you see in front of you, this has been in effect since about 2016, 2018. So this probably doesn't look new to you anymore. But back in the day, it didn't look like this. It was a lot smaller writing. They didn't have the added sugars listed in there. And on the bottom where you see those nutrients, vitamin D, etc., that's because, again, over time, when research changes, they come into understanding that, oh, we don't have to be so concerned about these nutrients of concern, but now we have to integrate other types of nutrients in here just to make sure if people are staying on top of things. And I'll go a little bit more into detail in some of these discussions as the slides progress. To explain a little bit more, but right, like you can see, like bold and things off to the side, etc., a little bit easier. This was also available for public comment. So the FDA sent out notifications that if you as a consumer wanted to say it looks great or I can't figure out what I'm reading, you could make comments in there. I'm going to continue talking, but as I advance through the slides, I'd love for you to put in the chat one of the first questions I want to ask. What are you looking for when you go shopping? Or do you look for things when you're shopping? Do you pick up the package and do you compare things? Tell me a little bit in the chat of what some of the things that you're focusing on when it comes to reading labels. And then I'll advance through the slides and share with you kind of the stuff that I'm going to focus on, the top, what I call like the big three, and we'll see if any of that comes up on your answers as well. So in the coming slides, we'll talk about serving size, calories, and nutrients. Starting off with the serving size, right at the top there, you'll see, again, I'm going to use kind of the same label for all of the stuff that the examples I'm given. This is very arbitrary. This just reflects a typical amount that someone would eat. It's not a hard, fast rule that you have to eat it. It's not a recommendation. And in fact, we've talked a lot too about if you're doing your own meal planning or if you're very active or you don't have an appetite, maybe you're eating half as much as what it says. Maybe you eat twice as much as what it says. So whatever it is that you're doing, if you're keeping in mind the information that you see under it and the calories, then, if you're eating half of it, you would divide by half everything you see there. And if you're eating twice as much or more than one serving, then you would multiply by what you see there too. So it would be twice as many calories, twice as much sodium, twice as much protein, etc. Next up, we have the calorie distinction here. And again, you've probably heard me in some of the past webinars too talk about this. So calories are a form of energy. You only get them through carbs and fats and proteins. Those are known as your macronutrients. That's what puts the gas in the car that is your body. And this helps your body function. So if you're somebody who likes looking for calories and you're like, oh, I try to stick with 100-calorie snack packs, etc., I would probably encourage you just to dig a little deeper. Take a look at what your timing is, your meals. About 100 calories equals about an hour's worth of energy. And especially if it's a balanced type of food product, which I'll explain about in some of the coming slides, you might not want 100 calories. You might need 200 and more because you need to go from today, right now, till 2.5, 3 hours from now, or even 6 hours from now before you eat your next meal. So take those things into consideration. It doesn't always mean less calories are the better if it's something that you're looking to customize for your own needs. Then again, things that are allowed on labeling, if a food item contains less than 5 calories, so 4.9 calories, less than 5 calories, it technically can list itself as calorie free or 0 calories. So if you're eating a 0-calorie food, but you're eating more than the serving size, you're not eating a 0-calorie food anymore, my friends. You're eating probably 20 or 30 calories instead, and that might make a difference if you're trying to keep track of things like that. Next up, the whole list of nutrients at a glance. So now you have the fat, the carbs, the protein, but also the cholesterol, the sodium, and those micronutrients too. Those are the things known as your vitamins and minerals that are listed here on screen. So I'm going to stop here for a second just to point out, right? It might be a little hard to see because the label, the writing is a little small, but if you're looking at fat, carb, and protein macros, this is a very carb dense food. This is 37 grams of carbs here, 8 grams of fat, and 3 grams of protein. protein. So if you're being conscientious about carbohydrates, you might opt out, or you could split the portion, or you can take it for what it's worth. And then you can, when you get home, you can doctor it up in some way. Maybe you add some extra nuts for some healthy fats, or maybe you add some extra protein sources, depending on what this food source is. You add an egg to something, or add some beans or something like that to kind of give that the balance that you need. Okay. The next one here is the percentage of daily value. I don't love this because it can be a little confusing sometimes, but basically what it's telling you is this food item contributes in a certain percentage or a certain way towards what your daily needs are. And it's really just those macros and micros listed there. So as an example, and this is based on what's known as a 2,000 calorie standard diet, but you might have less or more of that. So as an example, you can see calcium. I'm going down towards the bottom area there. So calcium, usually we need about 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams a day to meet our needs of calcium. This particular food item contains 260 milligrams. So that provides us with about 20% of calcium from just this one thing. So you can see on the right-hand side, anything less than 5 might be low, anything 20 or higher could be decent amount, whether it's a good or a bad item. And so that's not too shabby. It's kind of hard to get calcium throughout the day. So that might be an option I might want if I'm looking to get more calcium in my diet. Next up, we have the ingredients list. So you can see here on the left-hand side, it says ingredients, and these are listed in order of weight or by volume. So as an example, if you had a cup of pasta and a half a cup of whole wheat and a quarter cup of carrots and 2 tablespoons of chicken broth, that's the way that the ingredients are listed, almost like they're a recipe in size order. And this is what I want to point out in that second bullet about being careful about words you can't pronounce. Don't buy into the fear. If something is hard to pronounce, it's bad for you. I'm going to explain a little bit more about this in the coming slides when I give you some examples. So stay tuned on what I'm going to share. So here are some examples of labels that I took off the internet. This is a prepared item with steak, plus the seasonings, etc. Again, you can see the most amount versus the smallest amount as you go down the line. This looks a little crazy, right? This is probably some bread product, whole wheat flour, but then, I'm sorry, enriched wheat flour. But then you can see as you pass the interior ingredients that make up the flour, you come across sugar and corn syrup as like the number 2 and number 3 ingredients. So again, if you're being conscientious about sugar intake and added sugars, that might be not the greatest option for you, depending on how much it contributes to the actual food. I can't even see the ingredients on this thing. It's so small. It's right there. One thing, peanuts, that's it. And a little pinch of salt, and off you go. That's your peanut butter. And then next up here, you'll see sometimes they're bolded because they're pointing out things that could be containing as far as allergens are concerned. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. This is actually an example of just a brand name almond milk, carton of almond milk. So almond milk is made with filtered water and almonds. You can see that in the parentheses, and then some of the extra additives and things that are in there too. And this is where I want to point out that very last line, tocopherol. That's a name that maybe some people can't pronounce, but all it is vitamin E. So they're adding in a nutrient that might not necessarily come with it, or because of the processing, it has weakened it and they're adding it in just to kind of enrich that particular food item. So again, just because you can't pronounce something doesn't mean it's necessarily bad for you. All right, hot topic, sugar. So we're talking specifically about table sugar here, or added sugars. We're not talking about things that come naturally like in a banana or a blueberry. This gives my brain a massive headache. This is how much, how many names are specific to sugar. We're talking pure table sugar in sugar form. Most of the time you'll see if it ends in OSE, that's very easy to distinguish, but a lot of times you can see, and like I said before, if it's listed in the ingredients, you might see it listed as dextrose in number 2 and evaporated cane juice in number 13, and number 16 list of the ingredients says honey. So again, things to take into account when you're making choices for yourself. And if you're opting to do something, excuse me, like a low calorie or no calorie or sugar substitutes, artificial sweeteners, here are some of the words that you might come across as well. So these are things that are usually 0 calorie. Left-hand side, most of them end in OL. The middle and the right-hand side, those are probably maybe more well-known names. The right-hand side is a natural derivative. It's still considered a no-calorie or a low-calorie option, but it's derived from a more natural source versus a more kind of like lab-formed chemical concentrate there. The only thing about these things, pick your poison, as it were, no pun intended. But sometimes these things can be a little hard on the gut. And, if you've been to some of the other webinars, we're very big fans of your GI tract. That's where your immune system is. And it very much affects a lot of your other systems as well. So if you are tending to eat a lot of sugar-free or low calorie items, just be conscientious about how much of this you're putting in your body, because it can really mess up with your gut system. Okay, we have 9 top allergens. We welcomed sesame back in, I think, 2019, I think it was. So that made the top 9. You can see that listed there. I always like to think when I'm teaching my students this, like if you were going grocery shopping down the aisles, what are the major food allergens back and forth? On a label, the label has to indicate in plain English what allergen is. So you can see the bullet, whey and lecithin. Some people might not know whey is related to milk and lecithin is related to soy. So if you have an allergy for milk or for soy, that's right there. You can draw attention versus trying to figure out, is this something I have to go look up? So it's also, if it's not in the ingredients list, it could be listed next to, it could say contains wheat. It could also say something like this product is manufactured in a facility that also does these things, because of cross-contamination that can be kind of sensitive. So again, plain language and listed. Next up, we have health claims, specifically approved health claims, meaning things that manufacturers are allowed to put on their labels related to science-based evidence. And fun fact, what you're seeing in front of you is not an approved health claim. Cheerios is not allowed to say that, and they got pulled for doing that. We had a few years ago, the FDA went through a lot of the labels and told people, the manufacturers, they have to make sure that they're abiding by certain laws and legislatures. And so they can't necessarily say, or specifically say, you can have some Cheerios and you're going to lower your cholesterol by 4% in 6 weeks. There's no way they're allowed to make that claim. But what they can say is something like, this food item contains whole grains, which are known to lower your cholesterol or are known to be heart healthy. Some other examples are things like calcium and vitamin D. This product contains calcium, a good source for bone health. Or this item contains fiber, which is, again, naturally helpful for lowering cholesterol or good for digestion. So it can be specific to what is approved as far as science is concerned, but they can't make statements like this that could potentially not be true. Some red flags. So when you look at this slide here, noticing words that are appearing on the front of packaging again. And if you've heard me saying this before, I always say the front of packaging is fiction, but the back is fact, right? That's where you get all your information is on the back of the package. The front is a lot of marketing, enticing, fun, colorful things, stamps, etc. The language that is used here, it seems like you have seen before, but if I were to ask you, can you define it? Odds are you cannot. There are no definitive ways of saying what is considered quote unquote natural in a natural state. Or if there is a natural ingredient, like I said before, if you have a banana or a blueberry, that's a whole food. But does that mean that the food item, like the yogurt with the fruit on the bottom, is considered a natural product if it also has corn syrup and other additives in it? So if it's made with something that's natural, can they really say it's a natural product? And what even is that definition? Even something like made with whole grains, that doesn't mean it's a whole grain food or it contains 100% whole wheat. It's just telling you there's some stuff in there that might be healthy. And I'll give you an example in the coming slide of some of what my concerns around this are. If you drop down also keto is a very big trend, diet trend for a lot of people who are dealing with weight management or trying to do low carb diabetes management. The ketogenic diet is technically a medical intervention for people with epilepsy or seizures. It is a very specific ratio of carbs and fats and proteins in order to decrease the severity and the frequency of those seizures. But we've now co-opted it into diet culture to make it seem like this hot trend. So if something is keto friendly or a keto food, what they're probably saying is it's low carb. But again, there's no real definition there that says it has to meet this amount of grams of protein in order to be considered keto. So just things to keep in mind before, you have this kind of like educated consumer eye as you're shopping and picking up your food items. So here's the example I want to share with you. Actually, I brought this up in one of my classes and we all had a very good discussion about that. This is General Mills. It's a little bit blurry and hard to see, so I'll read some of this for you, but this is a true marketing ploy. It says things like Cinnamon Toast Crunch. I'm sure you probably recognize some of the brand names, right? Cinnamon Toast Crunch contains more zinc than an ounce serving size of chia seeds. Or if I drop down to Kix cereal provides more vitamin B6 than a cup of cooked pumpkin. Okay, well, if I want my patients, my clients, my loved ones to get more fruits and vegetables into their diet, I'm not sure I'm going to send them to the General Mills cereal aisle, because what they're not disclosing there is there's 20 grams of added sugar per serving size on these things. So, are you really enticed by the quote unquote health benefits of something that is also doing potential detriment to your body, your condition, your health? Now, it's not to say that I'm anti-cereal. If you've heard me before, all foods fit. There's flexibility in your diet. I really encourage you to enjoy foods that you love and foods that are nutritious for you. But I think this does a disservice because, again, it's enticing people to, instead of opting for getting more fruits and vegetables in their whole form or focusing on plant forward type of eating, it's going, have a box of chocolate checks instead, and that'll meet the requirements. I don't love that. I actually had a client that did this before too. She bought a package of chocolate chip muffins, and on it says includes 1 serving of vegetables, and on the ingredients I think it was like ground up pea powder or something, and I was like, oh, it's such a challenge to be in this profession. But I also understand, kind of the lore, and I maybe you agree or disagree with me with things like this too, but I would say just, err on the side of like, what are the pros outweighing the cons? Are the benefits and the risks equally weighted, and can you make an informed decision? Okay, so based on this discussion, so I just got done saying, right, front of package is fiction and the back is fact. Tell me in the comments too if you think this might be good. There's a proposed front of package nutrition labeling in effect right now. I don't know how far down it's going, but we might not see this for another couple of years. We're quite literally on the front. It'll give you this little label on this little stamp on top that you can quickly just see the 3 things that are most concerning for most consumers: saturated fat content, excuse me, sodium content, and added sugars. And it even has that percentage that we mentioned before, that daily value. So you'll see at a glance, wow, 37, I should say, this particular food item contains 37% of my sodium intake for the whole day just from this one food. So do you think that might be useful if you were to see just kind of quick at a glance when you pick up a food item versus turning it around and reading through the longer list on the back? Let me know what your thoughts are on that, and I'll keep you tuned if we know if it meets, and if it does go into effect. Usually, you won't see that take place for a couple of years because obviously the food manufacturers have to adjust accordingly with their labeling. All right, so now I'm going to go into more specific approaches if you're managing a chronic condition, or even if you're just curious about reading labels and having some strategies available to you. So on this slide, I'll go a little bit more in detail with diabetes, hypertension, which is high blood pressure, high cholesterol. So we'll talk a little bit more in the slides to come about what to look out for. And then the last bullet there, some other things to be kind of curious about or concerned about. If you're dealing with GI issues, gastrointestinal issues, you might be looking for fiber content either to help, or sometimes it's not so great to have a super amount of fiber depending on what your condition is, like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis or irritable bowel syndrome. All of those nutrients play a different role in whether or not it manages it or stops the triggering, the flare-ups from happening. And what I shared with you before in that artificial sweetener slide, some of those are really bad for the gut. And, again, excessive consumption, how much of too much is anything? It depends on what your threshold is. But if there's an excessive amount of consumption with these artificial sweeteners because you're also trying to manage your weight or your diabetes and you're eating a lot of low cal, no sugar foods or sugar-free foods that have those substitutes in it, that can be kind of painful in your stomach, lower GI, cramping, gas, bloating, etc. All right, so let me be a little bit more specific here. Things you may or may not have come across before. If you're dealing with diabetes and you are doing something known as carb counting, where you're keeping track of how many carbs you're eating and maybe you're injecting yourself with insulin, or you're just trying to be mindful throughout the day in general, then that could be something that you're looking at here. You're looking at the total carb number, in this case, 37 grams, and you're also looking at the fiber number. So in this case, 4 grams. And what you can do is just subtract fiber from carbs and you get what's known as net carbohydrates. So you're not actually consuming 37 grams of true carbohydrates. By the end of the food serving, it's really more like 33. And that can, decide again, maybe make a difference in what you're doing as far as your insulin injections or how you see the rest of the day playing out. Now, I will say here, if you notice, it does say it includes 10 grams of added sugars. So technically that is in that total line as far as the 37 grams already accounts for those 10 grams of added sugars. But if you're dealing with something like diabetes or just general recommendations of trying to be careful or conscientious with the extra stuff that's put in, I may say opt for something that has nothing and then maybe go do your own. Maybe this is like, a packet of oatmeal or something else that you can add to in your own control. You can control how many grams of sugars you're adding in or how you're sweetening something. Maybe you do add a smashed up banana instead of the table sugar that's in there. Next up, we have the discussion around hypertension, so high blood pressure, cardio issues, heart health issues. We call these the salty six. So some of these are things that you could find in packaged foods. Obviously, a lot of these are, or some might be takeout items from restaurants as well. But these are kind of like the top contenders. So the culprits, I should say. So you're not only looking at what's in your food, but what can affect your health potentially. And so here, when you're looking at the sodium content, here's another kind of little rule that you can follow too. So the net sodium is the amount of sodium minus the amount of potassium. And if you're a science nerd, you might know why that is. Sodium draws intracellular fluid, water into the cells. This is why when you eat a salty meal, you get bloated, your rings don't fit, your pants are a little too tight. Potassium excretes, gets rid of that. It flushes out the fluid from the cells. It's extracellular. So here again, you can see another way to look at it. If the food item has a decent amount of potassium, it can kind of be canceling that out too. And so it's not as high as you think it will. I will say in the case, I didn't mention this before in that previous slide, but I will say in the case of people dealing with kidney disease, and if you remember, we had the kidney webinar a while back, this might not be a good thing for you. If you're dealing with kidney disease, depending on your stage, depending on your labs, depending on your conversations with your doctor and your dietitian, you might not have, I should say, you might have to manage or limit some of the amounts of potassium, phosphorus, and protein, as well as sodium and fluids if you are dealing with different types of kidney issues. So again, it might not be the good thing here if you're dealing with a kidney issue, but if you're dealing with hypertension, that's a decent amount of potassium to kind of like balance out or cancel out. Another good rule of thumb when it comes to sodium is this as well. I like looking at the number next to sodium and multiplying it by 2. So if the number next to sodium is less than 2 times, right, the amount, and as you can see there with calories, if it comes to less of that amount, that means it's an okay product. So for an example, right, 160 times 2 is 320. That's a little bit higher than the calories here is 230. Not that bad. If it was more like 700 or 1,000, I might say, maybe opt for a low sodium option. We really want it to be under that. We want the 160 times 2. We want that number to be less than the number of calories. That's just another good rule of thumb. Obviously, there are different units of measurement, but it's just something to follow. Now, some exceptions might be like a pickle, right? Pickles have like 5 calories, but they might be 600 milligrams of sodium. It's a little hard to get that brine out, but in that case, maybe take the pickle out and like rinse it out, or same thing with a can of beans, maybe rinse out that brine or that salty water just to excrete some of that sodium in there. Or like I said, opt for a low sodium version and then doctor it up yourself with salt at home.
Dina, sorry to interrupt. but,
Yeah.
Is it 2 times the calories or just the number of calories?
Hold on one second. What do I have there? So 160 times 2 is 320, which means it's more than the calorie number. So that we don't want that. We want it to be less than. We want it to be less than 2 times.
Right, but there's another 2 times up the top.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. So I think I just put that in as like what do you call it?
Reinforce the 2 times.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you want it to be less than 2 times in that sense. Yeah, I'm sorry for not not describing it. So in other words, if it was, say it was 80 milligrams times 2 is 160. 160 is less than 230 for calories. Good. In this case, it's 160 milligrams. That times 2 is 320. That's more than 230 for calories. But again, it's kind of, for me, it's not as significant as if it were much, much higher. Then we would want to be conscientious of it. So that's just kind of a good rule of thumb. Take the number of calories that you're looking at. I guess the opposite could be true. Divide it by half calories. And if that number is, equal to or less than, I guess. Am I making sense? I hate explaining math, Matthew, Matthew. So apologies if that sounded confusing, but did that make more sense?
Too many
Sort of.
numbers.
Too many numbers. Yeah.
No, I'm
Right.
good with the 2 times.
Okay, I was gonna say, were you just going back to this one here, the previous slide instead? Right, the 2 times is the 2 times rule. You don't want your sodium to be more than 2 times the number of what the calorie number is. Okay, I think that's again the example that I'm listing there. I'll just keep reiterating that. 160 milligrams is listed here. If you multiply that by 2, and that number, that equal number, is more than the number of calories, that's probably a higher sodium type than you want. But again, within reason. It's not terrible. I'm okay with it. The other reason too is because the daily value listed there says 7%. So in the earlier slide where I was walking through that, it said if it's less than or equal to a 5% daily value, it's probably on the lower end. So you can use that as well. It's just, again, kind of depending on if you are okay or comfortable with numbers or figuring all this out. By the way, over the course of your day, we'll talk about this in a second, you might not be eating everything that has labels on it. You might not be able to keep track of this. So we'll talk a little bit more about how you can do that later on too. Okay, back onto cholesterol, heart health, et cetera, et cetera. You'll see here a few things that I pointed out, things that you might want to limit or avoid are in that fat family. So specifically saturated fat. If you remember from our macros and micros webinar, if you attended that, we talked a little bit about that too. Saturated fat is anything that is a fat food item or what's known as a lipid that is solid at room temperature and can potentially clog your arteries. So the less the better when it comes to heart health issues. I'm going to skip over cholesterol for a second. Fiber is good. Fiber is heart healthy. So that's actually something you want to look for. Usually it's hard to get a lot of fiber in a food. And when you do take in a lot of fiber, you always want to make sure you're also drinking or staying hydrated and drinking fluids because that stuff can backfire on you literally and figuratively and make you constipated in that sense. So 4 grams of fiber is really good. 3 to 4 grams per serving is pretty good. And again, over the course of the day, you're probably mixing and matching some foods, and maybe that number will end up meeting your requirements. We usually aim for about 25 to 35 grams of fiber per day. So if you add up this over the course. Now, the cholesterol number, I just want to point out, I have some notes on here. Back in the day, cholesterol was like a very hot topic. Everybody was like, the cholesterol free, fat free stuff. What we have learned from science is that it's not as big of a deal as it used to be in relationship to the other things, like we just said here, saturated fats and technically trans fats, but trans fats were banned in 2018. So they're still on the label because sometimes products have like trace amounts of them naturally, but manufacturers are no longer allowed to include trans fats in their ingredients because it's no longer recognized as safe. So the cholesterol number, which is only found in animal products, one of my fun pop quiz to give to my students is always which has more cholesterol. We did this, I think, last year with the heart webinar. Which has more cholesterol, an egg or an avocado? And a lot of people will say avocados are so high in fat. Yes, but plants don't have cholesterol. Only animal products do. So when it comes to the actual cholesterol number, if you are already dealing with cholesterol issues or heart issues, you're still going to keep this stuff in mind, but we don't see it be as big of a deal towards what's known as dietary cholesterol already found in food, versus that saturated fat number. So if that's something that you're eating in excessive amounts of, red meat or processed foods or fried foods specifically as well, like a lot of those outside types of foods, that's where we see more of the problem or more of the correlation being when it comes to increasing your risk of heart disease or making it harder for you to manage if you already have a diagnosis. The fiber discussion, we talk about what's known as soluble and insoluble. So I always like to consider this like soluble is kind of like a wet, soppy sponge that washes away things. And insoluble fiber is like a Brillo pad that's hard and scrubby. So soluble fiber are in things like fruit. By the way, fiber is only in plant foods, but soluble fiber is going to be in things like fruits, like apples and pears, and vegetables like your beans and lentils, legumes. And insoluble fiber is in things like whole grains and some of your cruciferous vegetables as well, like Brussels sprouts, broccoli. Most plants have a little bit of both, but some have higher ends of others. And again, with fiber, it helps with taking the cholesterol away, slowing our digestion, also good for diabetes as well. and just generally keeping us fuller longer too, which hopefully allows us to be satisfied or satiated in our meals. Now, this is a little tiny to see, but I wanted to show another example here. So I order some products when I'm at my mom's from a company called Daily Harvest, and they are 100% plant-based. It's only whole foods. They freeze dry everything, so you can like heat and eat things or add water to stuff like soups and stews. And they also do these smoothies. But they recently came out with this like protein smoothie, and I was like, oh geez, here we go. So, right, so protein smoothie versus regular non-protein smoothie or whatever, but they purposely put the stamp of 20 grams of protein on the left-hand side, and the regular smoothie doesn't say any of that. And if you look kind of quickly, you can even see left to right, the calories are changed too, right? 350 calories versus 430 calories. And that's kind of curious. And the reason is because they changed the serving size. So technically, yes, gram for gram, there is more protein in the protein smoothie versus the regular version, right? But if you didn't know that, if you weren't paying attention to the serving size when you're lifting up these labels and comparing them, you'd be like, okay, so that one has 1 gram more protein than the one on the right. And the one on the right has more actual like servings to it. It's harder for me. I might opt to do the one on the right. And for whatever reason, I don't have the ingredients list here too. I also noticed the sodium is higher too. So 260 milligrams of sodium versus 80 milligrams on the right-hand side. And again, this is all whole foods. So it's not like they're adding salt to it. So there must be something in there that is naturally kind of salty. So I'm curious to go back and see what the ingredients are. But again, it's just to kind of share because so many people are very concerned about how much protein they're getting in. And especially as we age, we naturally kind of wear and tear, right? We talk a lot about strength training and make sure we're repairing the muscle that might be kind of wasting away as we get older. Or if we come a little bit more sedentary, we're not as active, we can't lift things, we want to make sure we're managing our body composition. So people tend to err on the side of getting more protein. Again, if you're dealing with kidney disease, you want to make sure you talk to your doctor or your dietitian about this because that might be something that you might not be wanting to have more of, or you might have to put a limit on it. But I just thought that was an interesting thing. When I got to it, I was like, oh my gosh, it's just 1 stupid gram extra. What are they making this thing for? But then when I noticed they changed the actual serving size, it's less food in this one. So yes, technically there's more protein in it, but I'm also getting less of what I want. Like I want a heartier type of meat. So now I might have to add more things to it. And if you're super focused on protein, you might notice too, the carbohydrates are almost identical in these things as well. So again, give and take, just kind of being curious and making yourself a little bit more of an educated consumer wherever you go. All right, we talked earlier about some foods that do not require labeling, like fresh produce, head of lettuce and orange, etc. Meat and poultry items that are kind of whole, or if they're sliced up, they'll be packaged in cellophane, but they might not have an actual nutrient label in them, or single ingredient items, or even prepared meals. Like if you walk up and down a deli counter section and they have already done for you roasted chicken or sauteed spinach or mashed potatoes or a salad bar, there's no nutrition labels on any of those things either. So some of the recommendations there could be, we live in a world where you have access to technological things like databases, and we've seen this before. I've shown this to you before as well. This is the U.S. Department of Agriculture's government website, where it is a huge database of a lot of different foods, very comprehensive. So if you're curious about things and you have access to the internet while you're shopping, or you want to do a little inventory in your house and put together a meal plan for yourself, you can type in the search bar and it'll give you a very comprehensive list of all the nutrients that are in that particular food. So it'll give you potassium content, naturally occurring sugars, vitamins, minerals, etc. I don't have it listed on these slides, but other things too, like these apps that are available. I think somebody brought this up last time. Somebody used Yuka. I can't remember what it was, I think, or Yuka, Yuka, if I remember correctly. You can chime in if you want to, or tell me in the chat if I remember that. And also, just like the tracking apps, like MyFitnessPal. So you're not necessarily scanning a barcode because that has the information on it already, but you're typing in a whole food and you're looking through a database that already has the information for you. So that could be useful if you're just trying to prepare meals for yourself to get a better idea of what's in. Okay. As we come to the end of our webinars, I always like you to take a moment to reflect about what you learned or what was validated for you. Are you already a very savvy supermarket shopper? Are you looking for things, but you didn't realize you had to do math in your head? And we've confused you even more now when it comes to sodium and heart health. Or are there things that you've noticed? I am eating a lot of higher processed types of things like those salty six items. Maybe I want to scale back a bit and not do so much of that. So maybe this is just an opportunity to reflect on what you want to start doing. Especially, this is a great foray into a new season as we get closer to the end of the year, the holidays. You don't have to wait until January to do new year, new you things. You can do it at any time, what you might want to start doing. If you're already a savvy shopper, if you're already keeping an eye on things, if you're already, excuse me, managing your conditions and you feel really good about it, this was a good thing to do. So congratulations on keeping up with that. And then again, if there's anything you want to maybe stop doing, just consider those options as well based on what we learned today. So this, I'm going to jump in the chat in a sec just to see what I missed because I didn't go back there like I said I was going to. But this is our next conversation. October is a lot of awareness things go on over the year. There's breast cancer awareness. So we're going to focus on cancer awareness and prevention next month on Thursday, October 9. But I very much thank everybody. And I'm going to check the chat now. But if anybody has any questions, comments, or feedback, please feel free to chime in. Oh, there it is. Yeah, you got. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you. Thank you. Yep. Yeah, dates for expiration. Exactly, Matthew. Thank you. Earlier. Oh, that's it. Just a few people in the chat this time. A little quiet. Anyone else? Questions, comments, or feedback?
Yeah, I've got a question for you, Dina. I do
I'm
like
listening.
looking at labels, but I'm just wondering overall, with the emphasis on natural and people willing to pay up for quote unquote natural products, is that something you got to look more carefully at? Like you said, it can mean anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I come back always to like the organic discussion. Most large organizations, food organizations will probably do more conventional things, but I keep going back to how much of too much is anything. Like, is the purpose? So if it's a conversation around I don't want pesticides or toxic chemicals, then maybe you err on the side of when it's available, when it's in season, when I have coupons, when I have the budget for it, I might opt for that. But over the course of the day, the meal, the week, are those blueberries going to kill you? I'm going to probably say no. And, I also say we're not in hermetically sealed environments. So if we're struggling to keep up with buying the most healthful brands of foods or only getting organic and it's, kind of eating away at our pocket, but then we go outside and we smell the fumes of the MTA subway lines and or side note, stress, right? If I'm constantly dealing with chronic stress, which is putting me in a constant inflammatory space, my body is constantly inflamed. No amount of organic blueberries is going to help me with that. So I really feel like it's a very individualized approach. Some people like to just be super, super quote unquote clean. Again, however they're defining that, I don't know. But I really try to just say, like, try not to put too much stress over all of the singular choices and instead look at your overall habits in general, right? Like the joke used to be, I'll have a tab soda, but I'm eating like a chocolate cake, or I'm doing all these fruits and vegetables, but I'm outside smoking my cigarettes. So weigh your options as it is as far as the patterns are concerned, and focus more on what I like to do of like an 80-20 split. Are 80% of my foods, my choices coming from things that feel nutritionally dense, within my control, things that I can feel comfortable with, and are 20% of my meals or food choices coming from things that whatever they're going to be what they're going to be. So like organic French fries is not going to be a thing. I don't think. I don't. Again, it's like weighing out the options. Matthew, I feel like every time you ask me a question, I always go, "It depends," but it's true. Like I really want to kind of destigmatize and take away what feels like morality on food. Like I'm not a good person if I don't eat the good stuff, but you might not be able to afford all the quote unquote good stuff. And some of the stuff is totally fine nutritionally wise. It just depends on how much of too much is anything as far as, what's adding up in your system. Does that help? Maybe?
Yes, appreciate
Okay.
that.
You're welcome. You're very
All
welcome.
right, let me ask you a different kind of label question.
I'm
If
listening.
you only had to focus on one thing, and maybe this depends on the overall health of the population, should
Yeah.
it be salt or should it be sugar?
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I feel like Sophie's choice here. I feel like both, only because both of them can really do so much detriment, and both of them play a different role in different ways. Like, the first thing I ask when I meet with people is, are you a salty tooth or a sweet tooth? So I feel like it depends on who you are. If you do enjoy having more of the salty types of things, be careful and conscientious. And some people might be like, I'm not really big on sweets and stuff. If you do tend to have more sugar, 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 or you have an issue with taste buds, because I think also as we age, we start losing those olfactory senses. So we need something that feels like it tastes saltier, or we need things to be super sweet because the taste buds are kind of, foregoing us, that we're making these options. So I really feel like it's very close. But if I had to, I would probably say sodium. I'd probably say sodium.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm trying to break it down. Sodium affects the cellular levels and directly related to heart health for sure. Excess sugar is going to package as triglycerides, which affects cholesterol, but it also ends up with body fat composition too. And so for people who are in larger bodies, or having more excess fat around them, they're already living in a kind of like an inflamed um place. So again, that's putting maybe them at risk, and I try to be very body conscious. Like, I try not to make anybody feel bad for whatever their body is. But the point is if you're already feeling like you're a large person, you might be somewhat sedentary, and you're adding in extra things that can turn into fat. Just be careful of that, because that can then increase your risk of other things down the line. But um if you're active, if the rest of your blood levels are coming back fine. Again, how do we define moderation? Sticking to the recommendations of what we have, less than 1,500 milligrams to 2,300 milligrams of sodium a day. Less than 10% of your foods should have the added sugar, should be less than 10% in the foods. So again, just kind of doing some mental math, and looking at the larger scheme of things, the larger picture. I'm also thinking of alcohol as you're talking too. That would, like, if I had to rate it, number one would be alcohol, number two would be sodium, and number three would be sugar. Get rid of it, or be conscientious and limit it.
Okay. No alcohol. Doesn't
Yeah.
that have sugar in it?
It could. What is it, like tequila and stuff, like those white versions? They're not as carby as other ones, but they're very carcinogenic. So
Yeah.
they cause cancer. Yeah. I know, I come with good stuff and I come with not so good. So wah wah. Let's end on a fun discussion. What's everybody eating later? I'm not gonna have any salty things. Yeah, again, it's the load. It's the load of anything. How much is it over the course of the day that's doing the potential harm or benefit.
Yeah.
We talked about when even good foods attack. Like, if you eat bushels and bushels and bushels of spinach, you're probably going to end up with a kidney stone. So too much of anything is not great. Our body really loves balance and variety and diversity. It likes a little bit of everything every so often, so it can properly function. And then we as humans like to have the little extra stuff. I honestly, if I had to say too, Matthew, because this is just an overall systemic discussion, why do we let food manufacturers put in that much salt or put in that much sugar when we're trying to really rein all that in? So I try to really be careful too with placing what's known as healthism. It's not the consumer's responsibility to make the conscious choices when the conscious choices are not available to them, as far as affordability and accessibility is concerned, if that makes sense.
It really does.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. And this is the
Oh, thanks.
opportunity for anyone else to chime in here.
Hi, Fatima and Rosie, Veronica, Glendani again. Hello, hello. Hi, Carlton, Susan. I'm looking at all the names now. Hi again, Eileen. Hi, everybody. Who did I say hi to? Dilcia and Theodore. Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you.
Oh, I want to advance one more slide though, Matthew, just because I always like to share the research behind stuff. So, when I put together these 1 hour webinars, it's basically between like 6 to 10 hours of work that I do. And sometimes I have an intern or a student working with me, and sometimes I pour over stuff myself. I think I had about 20 to 30 resources that I use for this, and I whittled it down to just, about a dozen or so that you can see on screen here. So they come from mostly organizations that are well known, or government sources, or what are known as science-based, research articles. So people who are doing the work for us that we can then implement with recommendations. So I just want to say thank you to all of these people here too, the organizations and the scientists that do all of this stuff for us that I can then share with you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.